Hey, folks, good evening and welcome to the strategy session. I am joined tonight by Joe Trippi and Simon Rosenberg. We are trying to get a hold of Stuart, but we haven't yet. But we're going to just go ahead and start rolling the show right now just to get things going. So, want to just say we are all looking forward to the results out of New Hampshire tonight. But I want to also look a little more prospectively. First off, I want to ask Joe a quick question as we jump into this. Joe, so in the exit polling, I'm seeing a couple of things that I find kind of heartening, and I'm not exactly Mr. Sunshine. So I want to ask both Joe and Simon that question. The exit polling so far, the composition of the electorate looks about like we expected, and there seems to be a little bit of fault lines in here on immigration and on abortion in particular. But let's go ahead and tell me what you're seeing, Joe, and then we'll go to you, Simon.
Well, both those are right. When 67% of a primary electorate in New Hampshire says that they oppose a national ban on abortion, and another roughly 50% or close to 50% say they oppose a mass migration, immigration deportation thing, and state
Right.
would choose, I think 45% or so would rather extend some pathway to citizenship. This is a Republican primary in New Hampshire that both of those issues are real tough, not just
Right.
for Trump, but for battleground House members in the seats that Biden won and things like that. So I think those are pretty heartening. And I also think just the turnout in terms of if the reporting is correct, that it's almost 50-50
Right.
with non-declareds running, voting. The thing about that is, look, Iowa really has always been a test of party. Can you get the party
Right.
regulars out? Who can get them out? Trump was already showing some signs of trouble in the suburbs of Des Moines and Johnson County in Iowa, where
Right.
Haley actually beat him by a vote. That showed some weakness. But then New Hampshire is really about, okay, can you expand outside your base and attract independents? And right now,
Well, Joe has frozen, so I'm going to jump over to you, Simon.
I want to, first of all, echo something that Joe's been saying for months, which is that Trump was a weak candidate. I think that this is the story of the election so far. I think Trump
Right.
is much weaker than he was in 2016 and 2020. He's far more degraded. He's more extreme. He's more dangerous. His performance on the stump is far more erratic. And I think it's starting to show up in the actual voting, right? I mean, the turnout in Iowa last week was anemic. And
Right.
as many have said, I mean, I think Trump got 56,000 votes, and there were 696,000 registered Republicans who didn't vote for him, right? Which is an incredible number, given that he's supposed to have these superpowers, right? And
Right.
this super hold over the Republican electorate, and now you're seeing tonight again. You're starting to see evidence, and we saw it a lot on television the last couple of days. The interviews with just people on the street, the Haley events. There is real reticence about Trump and real worry about Trump, and also an awareness that he's a threat to democracy, that he's committed crimes, that he's a bad guy, right? And however you want to say that, and
Mm-hmm.
that, we know from the data tonight, again, just like we saw in Iowa, there's real clear data that there's a big chunk of the Republican Party that Trump is going to struggle to bring back home in the general election if he's the nominee, just in the way the Trumpy candidates in 2022 had struggles in the battlegrounds, bringing the party together after their primaries. It's a big
Right.
problem, right? And this is stuff you know way better than I do. I'm not an expert on the Republican Party, but I think, again, the real story of this first couple weeks of 2024 is this basic dynamic that we saw play out throughout 2022 and 2023, which is Democrats overperforming, Republicans struggling post Dobbs, is now showing up in 2024. Trump is struggling, I would argue. I mean, there's some data here that is very worrisome to them. And last week in Florida, right, we flipped a contested House seat that
Yep.
the Republican, we were outspent 2, 3, 4 to 1. I don't remember what the final number was. And that was the morning. I want to just point out something. That morning, Florida Republicans woke up to Trump and DeSantis being number 1 and number 2 in Iowa. It was a good day if you were a Florida Republican, and
Sure.
we still kicked their ass in a highly contested race in Florida. So, I'm as a Democrat, I'm optimistic about what all this means for our ability to win. We got a lot of work to do, Rick, as you know, but I'd much rather be us than them as we head into 2024.
Right. I mean, this is one of those lessons you never take your foot off the gas at this point. We are in the general election now, folks.
Yeah.
And I do think it's interesting that DeSantis and Trump and Nikki Haley were the three most serious, well-funded candidates in this race. And the most fascinating thing to me is, I haven't modeled it, but I would bet you that 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 DeSantis voters go to Trump. I'm not sure that more than 50% of Nikki Haley voters go back to Trump. There is something that she is catching a little bit of a moment at a demo in New Hampshire, and you can see it with a lot of these folks there, the older voters on all these clips that are out there today, basically saying, "I'm done with this guy. I'm done with the show. I'm done with the craziness. I'm done with Trumpism. I just don't want it anymore." And I'm fascinated by that because on paper, those older boomers are his best audience.
Yeah, listen, I think that just like the red wave in 2022, a lot of this sort of horse race without ballot, single ballot test polling that we've been relying on for the last few months was always simplistic. It was always kind of we learned in 2022 that centering your understanding about American politics on horse race polling was dangerous. And as soon as you started pushing the electorate a little bit, right, we saw this in the New York Times poll, the big New York Times poll that kind of created the freakout back in October.
Right.
They asked the question about if Trump is convicted of a crime, would it change your vote? And in the battleground states, the vote, we saw 8 to 10 point movement. And every time that this has been tested, and it hasn't been tested that often, it's shown dramatic movement where people have actually tried to test this stuff. And even tonight, I think I don't have it in front of me, but something like 50% of Republican voters say that in New Hampshire that they would consider him unfit if he were convicted of a crime. And the thing is, courts and juries have already determined that he raped a woman in a department store dressing room.
Absolutely.
That he committed massive decades-long financial fraud, and he led an insurrection. And it's not a speculative thing that may happen in the future. It's already happened. And I think what you heard, it's been adjudicated.
I do think, look, folks, we know Trump's still going to win New Hampshire tonight. It's only a matter of the degree and the scale. Now, how much these independents and Democrats who came out to have a little bit of fun today pushed it toward the line, it will be an interesting moment. Do you guys, Joe and you and I were talking about this morning. What do you think the number she has to put up on the board tonight would be to stay credibly in the fight for the next month and wait and get into South Carolina? I think it's somewhere like she has to be within like less than 15 points of Trump to make that happen.
Yeah, but she could be in single digits. We just don't know yet. I
don't know
that Trump's likely to win. But the reality is, look, I think if she's above 40, it's a problem. Doesn't mean she gets to, how long she'll last. But if first of all, we're already seeing the cracks. I mean, when 88% of her, I think it's actually 94% of her supporters in this exit poll say that they would be dissatisfied if Trump is the nominee of the party. I mean, these are not all independents or Democrats playing a game. There are a ton of Republicans, conservatives. She's getting something like 29% of conservatives, at least in the self-ID'd conservatives in this poll, in the exits. These are rock bed Republicans, a lot of them, who are saying, no, I'm disappointed if she isn't the nominee. So all the weaknesses that we're talking about, the other one that I was talking about was it's a test of who can win independents in a general election. Right now, if she's anywhere near him, it means he's got a problem with independents in the general. And I think all these things are pushing forward.
Yeah, I mean, Simon, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, it does seem to us at Lincoln and a lot of other analysts that the soft Republicans and independents, that group has expanded since the Dobbs decision. It's expanded since Trump has come really back on the stage. How good of a lab is New Hampshire in that regard in your mind?
We're going to find out, but I mean, the data so far suggests that, as we've been saying, that Trump has got a lot of problems. I mean, there was always going to be a question about whether or not, particularly given what we saw in 2022 in the battleground states, where these surrogate Trump-like candidates really struggled to
Right.
pull the Republican coalition together. I
Lake,
mean, this was
Mastriano, yeah.
right. This was a field test, right? And the Republican Party failed it, and Trumpism failed it. MAGA failed it. And there's no reason to believe that 2024 is going to be substantially different. Of course, lots of things could change, right? A meteor could hit the Earth. I mean, a million things could happen. But the point is that right now, this problem, this big problem that Trump is not what he was in 2020. Central is not who he was in 2020. He has at least 6 things that voters don't know about, that each of which I think could be a disqualifier for him for a big chunk of the Republican, of Republican voters, and that's the rape. That he raped a woman in a department store, that he committed decades-long financial fraud, that he led an insurrection and tried to overturn American democracy and promised to finish the job, that he stole America's secrets, lied to the FBI about it, and gave away these secrets. And then he also, we know, his family took more money from foreign governments than any political family in the history of the country, and he ended Roe. Those 6 things were not part of his brand in 2020. And to the point that Joe was making earlier, he staked out very far right ground on immigration, on rolling back the ACA, on abortion. That's going to push him even further and further away from the 2020 electorate. And so I look at this guy, and what I see is weakness, struggle. He's going to have a hard time winning the election. We should win this election, in my view, by high single digits in the fall. It's now up to the Biden campaign to be able to sort of build a kind of campaign that can seize this moment and hopefully make this election a clear repudiation of MAGA, so MAGA's dark grip on the Republican Party starts to get loosened next year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was one of the numbers.
I mean, Simon, you've been making what we call the case for hope a lot lately, and I think that's a really important part of it. You've been making the case for hope lately, based a lot on the economic facts on the ground in the country and that lag between good economic news and a change in the polling. Talk to us a little bit more about that, because folks have asked me that question repeatedly, and you've been sort of the leading edge of that theory, and it's turning out to be right.
Well, the thing is that every time we've had a big economic downturn, there has been a lag of 3 to 6 months between when consumer confidence starts to rise, when the market starts to hit new high. I mean, when you start seeing that news, and by the way, the consumer confidence and University of Michigan numbers, when they start to jump the way they've been jumping the last few months, that always lags by a good 3 to 6 months. It happened under Reagan. It happened with Obama. That's just the reality is, when you've suffered a downturn, when people feel that angst and the problems of being under that kind of economic pressure, even when the economy comes out of it and starts to really push, it's like, what are you talking about? Reaganomics, it's crap, right? And so I've always thought, and have said for some time, that when everybody was asking why, the economy is starting to move, why isn't his approval numbers so low? Why are they so low? It was like, wait 3 to 6 months. And now I think you're starting to see that. I really think we're months away, a few months away, plenty of time between now and November, that the way people are answering consumer confidence and some of these other things that are happening right now will start to be reflected in approval numbers and feeling better about the economy and the direction of the country. So in a lot of ways, the things that were anchors around Biden are the weight is decreasing, while the weight on Trump, because of all the things that Simon just went through, the litany of reasons that weren't there in 2020. So in a lot of ways, the anchor, because in 2022, gosh, come on, guys, the inflation, gas prices, everything was much worse than it was.
Markedly worse.
And so that anchor, which was an anchor, it doesn't weigh as much, and it's actually starting to lift for Biden. At the same time, the chains around Trump that are pulling him down, that Nikki Haley, frankly, is part of exposing it and getting out. Christie was too. I wish she'd be more forceful about it, but hopefully, who knows what'll happen tonight. And by the way, if she does stay into South Carolina, that's a month of how's Trump going to react? How much of this does he, create bigger problems for himself and a bigger split in the party that she's already sort of exposing? It's there, and particularly, like I said, and Simon's talked about with these independents, with the women voters in the suburbs, that's only going to get worse for him than it was in 2020.
Right. So let me ask you guys this, and I'll start with you, Simon. And I know we're being prospective here. If we end up in as we all presume we will, end up in a frame with Trump as the nominee, how do you think that affects the down ballot in the Senate and House races specifically? Because my theory of the case is it's really going to upset Mitch McConnell's wagon on the Senate, where he has a good map this year, but you may end up, if Trump's back on the ballot, with these MAGA choices getting back on the into the faces of Americans, the same sort of people we just talked about in 2020 who were so terrible.
I think one of the most fascinating dynamics that may play out in the next few months is that Trump, in his newly authoritarian kind of dictatorial kind of positioning, is going to assert extraordinary levels of control over the Republican Party if he becomes the nominee, including Mitch. And Mitch, we've already seen Ron Johnson, who's one of the MAGA allies, took a huge shot at Mitch today, saying he couldn't negotiate his way out of a paper bag, kind of unprecedented attacks on Mitch. And, Mitch was asked about this, and he says, I have no news to make today. And I do think that Mitch has to be terrified about what could happen here, and the Republicans in the Senate. It was interesting in a story in either Puck or Politico yesterday, John Thune, who's the likely heir to McConnell, has been expressing enormous concern about Trump being the nominee, right? I mean, he's been out about it. He's not supporting Trump. He hasn't endorsed him. So let me just say this. I think it's a big problem for two reasons. One, in addition to everything we just said. One is, in the battleground states, we've litigated MAGA now 3 times. We litigated in 2018, 2020, 2022. Yep. There is muscle memory. There's understanding in these states about the radicalization of the Republican Party.
Who these people really are.
Right. And so the idea that Trump comes back is going to be an enormous depressant, in my view, on the Republican chances in the battlegrounds in particular, where this stuff has been much more heavily litigated on television in the campaigns than it has been in many other states. The second thing is that those Biden 18 include, New York and large numbers of seats in New York and California. And I think, this time we have a lot of money. We have organization. We're not going to let the slide that happened in 2022 happen again. And I think it's going to be very, very hard for the Republicans to defend those seats in New York and California. I mean, the Swazi race is going to be an interesting, which is on February 13th, is an early test of this. And the first polling looks very, we're optimistic about it. And I can tell you that the grassroots response to Swazi across the country and in New York has been immense. There's incredible intensity around that race. So I think it's a big problem for them. And I think that it's very hard for Mike Johnson, given how tied he is to Trump, right, as one of the architects of the insurrection, to somehow create distance from this politics for his candidates. It's not going to be easy for him instinctively, right, in terms of his political range that he has. McCarthy had more ability to create space. I think it's going to be much harder for Mike Johnson.
I think that's right. Joe?
Yeah, look, I just think, the House, I think, again, look at these exits on abortion, a lot of these issues here. Trump is, in the 18 seats that Biden won, those Republicans they're already in tough place anyway. But now, just on these issues, if these get Republican primary voters that are saying, no, I don't want that. And so I think those voters are going to, are going to, in those districts, I think we're going to do well. I think we're going to do well beyond them. But I think we're going to definitely, I think, the House, I think, is really in play for us to take a majority there. And then the Senate, I agree with Simon and you in terms of we've got to see who they nominate. But again, they're going to be these issues in these battleground states are going to hang around. Dobbs, et cetera, is all going to be a problem that we've seen now for, like as Simon said, for 3 cycles. Have
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
have created the environment where the red wave didn't happen, even when we were in the worst economic times in a long time. It doesn't, the economic times are not going to be what they were in 22, but these other issues are going to be more in play, and Trump is going to make it more difficult for these candidates to move away from it.
Rick, can I just jump in with one thing? Something to build on something Joe said earlier is about how much the talking points about Biden that they use, that we all see all the time, every day, have evaporated in the last few months, right? High inflation, well, prices are falling. The economy's terrible. The economy's booming, right? He's led a war on energy, and we've had higher renewable oil production in 2023, right? That I have a whole list of these things, and all they're left with, right, is the border. And Biden is working diligently right now. I mean, so all these other things that are far more important to the narrative and story that Republicans have been using to indict Biden are continually evaporating, right? I mean, we have the lowest uninsured rate in American history. I mean, blah, blah, you can go through the whole list. And the space they're operating in now and the indictment they have of him has also largely evaporated. I mean, they're going to go to his age, right? But I still think the age we can get to a draw because Trump's performance.
Anybody who's watched Trump the last week, if I was the Trump campaign, I'd be really careful about going on age and infirmity.
I agree. I mean, I don't think that's really available to them. And I also think Joe Biden's going to be able to say a very simple thing, which is that I've been a successful president because of my age and experience and wisdom, not despite of it. I think there's a way to turn that on its head, and tie it back to his success as a president. So when I look at you did this for a living, man. Like when you look at the way that Republicans can go after Biden, the available attacks they have on him are getting, the attack surface has gotten a lot smaller. And so they're going to be more, they're going to go after much more narrow than it was before.
Well, I think we're going to take a little bit of audience Q&A. And if Sam, you want to load up a couple of questions for us, let us know what you guys are thinking. In the meantime, I do think it's striking that among New Hampshire Republicans, immigration was a higher priority than the economy. I think, Simon, that is a recognition of what you said, that there is a sort of gut instinct that they know the economic attack is not going to work anymore, and they've been getting pummeled on the economy by Fox or the immigration the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and look, I think the immigration issue, it's so critical that Biden wrestled this thing to the ground. He's trying really hard in a good faith effort to come up with a bipartisan agreement that, tries to make improvements on the border. Because I think the way this is used by Republicans, it's about race and immigration and the great replacement theory, but it's also an indictment. It also, if you think Biden's old and not really on top of it, right, this is a sign of him not being able to corral the government to do its basic functions. And so I give the Biden team a lot of credit for having really engaged the Republicans in a good faith effort, Republicans who have historically been very extreme on this issue and don't put forward solutions that will really make things better. We'll see what happens. I'm still an optimist, but it's very possible that we end up with nothing, and that Ukraine doesn't happen, and Israel doesn't happen, and Taiwan doesn't happen, and the border doesn't happen, and because Trump wants to blow everything up. And the question of whether or not he's basically laid down the law that nothing's going to come out of the House until after the election, and whether Mike Johnson is willing to do that, right? We'll see. The dynamics on this are going to get really wild, I think, pretty quickly.
Yeah, but here's a couple of numbers from the exit that shows you how this is. The people who say they're getting ahead financially, that's like 18%. People who feel like they're steady financially and is 60%. Falling behind financially in this electorate, 20%. Now I'm not arguing that, but like if anybody told you those numbers like a month or two ago, you would have been,
Well, and can I add to that, Joe? Is that you were saying one of the things that's also when you look at the data beyond the question of whether the economy is good or bad, on questions of life satisfaction, job satisfaction, income satisfaction, those numbers are up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, right? There's this basic sense that we got through the COVID nightmare and now we're on the other side and that things are pretty good. Axios just did a poll a few days ago where all they asked was about people's perception of their personal finances, not the economy writ large. And that was also overwhelmingly strong and popular and optimistic about what was going to happen in 2024. And so I think like in 2022, we learned that basing your understanding of the election around Biden's approval rating was probably not very smart and was not, basing your understanding of America's relationship to the economy around this question of whether or not the economy is good or bad is also, I think, risky and dangerous because there's a lot of other data showing that people actually are much more optimistic about the economy than on that top line measure.
No, and to point that out, I think you sent around that poll in Pennsylvania where I think
the Susquehanna poll, right?
Yeah, Biden's approval was like 38, but he was beating Trump by like 8 points or something like that. I mean,
I think there's been a big decouple on overall approval rating and economic stuff. It used to be, as they said, somebody said this the other day. I mean, that was you, Simon. Somebody the other day said it used to be that the economy drove perceptions of your political perceptions, and now it seems your political perceptions drive how you see the economy.
Yeah,
and I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of these places. Next question: will this be the longest general election in U.S. history? Yes. Yes, it will.
Unfortunately.
Does Nikki stay in to get defeated in South Carolina or save face? I'm in the save face category.
Joe,
I think she stays in. I think she stays in. I think.
You do?
Well,
I mean, she got money.
If she does show up within single digits tonight, she definitely stays in. She'll have money. If I don't know if it's a blowout, obviously no, I'm with you. But I don't. It's too early tonight to know how this is going to close up. But given the demographics and sort of what we are seeing in turnout and the exits, I wouldn't be surprised if she's within single digits and stays in.
Wasserman is calling it for Schultz as we speak, but we'll see how it goes. All right, one more question here. I've got a couple more actually. Will the Democrats ever get over 60 Senate seats again? Tough assignment.
Hard to
it's
see.
Not for anybody to get 60 Senate seats anymore.
Yeah. It's hard to see in the short term.
Not likely. So, not going to happen.
Yeah, that's a long. That's a high hill to climb. Okay. Effect of the third party candidates. Well, the Schmidt Phillips campaign ends tonight because Biden's going to win with write-ins.
Can I talk about that for a second?
A lot of those people voted on the other side. I do. I think a lot of independents who would have voted for, would have voted in ours, voted on the other side. But that's part of what New Hampshire's about. If all those independents had flooded into the Democratic primary and voted for Dean Phillips, that would have said, hey, Joe Biden's going to have problems with independents in the general election. I think what we're seeing is they flooded into the Republican primary for a reason. They have real problems. It's the same thing that we're seeing with the double haters. They want to stop Trump a little bit more than they want to. Then they have problems with Biden on policy and stuff. So I think this is kind of a microcosm of that we're seeing that happen with this turnout. It looks to me like the big turnout, if there is one, it's not because more Republicans voted. It's because more undeclareds voted in the Republican primary than last.
Yeah, I will just say that I've been ignoring Dean Phillips because the opposite of love isn't hate; it's indifference, in life. Yes. But I have been shocked today at what he's saying about Joe Biden. I mean, it is inside a party primary. It's way over the line, and I don't know what is motivating him. I don't understand because it's also, by the way, it doesn't work. Right? That's the other thing. Is like Biden's got this very high approval rating in New Hampshire and everything else, and you're basically saying the guy's a POS, like he's using language. I will just tell you, the language Dean Phillips was using today felt like it was written by a Republican and not a Democrat.
It was.
And I know, and we all know who it is. And The thing is, I don't understand what he's doing at a strategy level. I don't understand what he's doing in terms of his long-time viability as a Democratic candidate. He's in, he is now. I mean, I'm angry at him. Before I was like annoyed, right? Now
Right.
I have like life energy that I want to make sure that I
Right.
do something to rough him up in the next few weeks. And it's to what end? I don't, that's the thing that's so mysterious about it. I don't even really want to. I've just been.
Yeah.
Let's hope.
No,
Let's hope that thing. Let's hope that thing
well,
ends tonight, and that will be
Yeah.
the best for
Dean's
everybody.
dead man walking has been from the day he got in. I do think there has to be some concern again about the third parties, though, in the general, because
Absolutely.
a lot of these independents that we see that are dissatisfied with Trump, if he's the nominee that Haley's got, those are people that one on one, and we see this in the polling. They all say they'd vote for Trump. 57% of her supporters say they vote for Trump over Biden over Trump. The problem is if there's an off ramp, a viable off ramp, a lot of these voters will take it, and those are votes that Biden would get. So
Right.
I still think it's no labels equals Trump, and in a vote for any third party in this election is a vote for Trump, and we need to try to take that on and define it that way as early as possible for people to get it. When they do get it, because we've done a ton of polling on this in the Gephardt group, Citizens Save Our Republic, and as soon as they get that the argument that no labels equals Trump or that a vote for a third party equals Trump, those double haters immediately do not take the off ramp. And once they get that, oh, that's all. I don't want to do that. I don't want to help Trump. That was the whole reason I was thinking of Biden in the first place. I don't need to take an off ramp to do that. And it's a very important message that the more we get it out there, the better early on.
All right. Well, guys, before we wrap up tonight, I want to ask one more question. It's sort of related to an audience comment. News tonight came that Jen O'Malley Dillon is going over to the campaign from the White House. What are your thoughts on that?
Jen's a good friend. I think she's, arguably the most accomplished political operative of this generation. Immense experience going back. I think she's been more involved in more presidential cycles than even Joe Trippi, right? I mean, she's at least comparable to Joe in terms of being on, and so I think it's good. I think it's, look, Biden has a small inner circle of trusted advisors. She's one of them.
Yep.
She's run a presidential campaign before. I think it's a sign that, they're gearing up and getting ready to do what we got to go do. And so Julie Rodriguez is also a good friend who is the campaign manager. We'll see how that all gets worked out, but I think this is a good signal and it's the right time. It's time to get going.
Yeah,
right. It's a good day to do it, right, Joe?
There are people in the White House that I think, for obvious reasons, resisted going over to the campaign. I mean, just because they have great roles there. It was time. It was time. My view a couple of months ago, but it's great that they made the move and that Jen O'Malley Dixon is on her way to Wilmington.
Yeah, I think she'll sharpen things up.
They needed that. Yeah. Also, that tightness with Biden himself within the campaign.
It really matters. It expedites decision making.
That's
and it's
right.
hard. It's hard when there's a White House. The reelection is very hard in terms of getting sign off on stuff, right? Because there's a White House, there's a campaign. Jen's going to be able to expedite all that. Yeah. She's the deputy chief of staff in the White House. She's involved in every major political decision inside the White House.
She knows how the procedural stuff inside and outside should work.
She knows how to get decisions made. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a very important step, and I think it's going to be a big help, a big assist to getting it done right.
Well, guys, thank you for coming on tonight. Folks, you can follow Simon at SimonWDC. You can also read his excellent Substack, Hopium Chronicles. And Joe Trippi and I are going to be back with you, I think, in an hour on LPTV. And we're going to talk about the actual numbers we're getting out of New Hampshire. And we'll have some more conversations about where this whole thing is going and the impact of tonight. And whether we get to watch Nikki Haley get batted around a few more days by Donald Trump. we shall see. Thank you again, Simon, for joining me. Thank you, Joe. We will talk to you folks again later. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks, Rick.